Today on the Locked On Steelers podcast, we're going to focus a lot on Steelers center Zack Frazier out of West Virginia. There were a lot of people excited to see him selected, but maybe none more than our guest today, and that's one Wes Uhler, a WVU grad and big voice on Steeler Nation Radio. That and a lot more here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admitted I have a competitive side, and as a big fan of Monopoly Go, it's the mobile hit twist game on the classic game of Monopoly that you need to download today. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store and Google Play. As we're joined by the man, Wes Uhler. He's in the house, and he's sporting some Zack. Is that a Zack Frazier WVU jersey?
Yeah, brother. It's got the nameplate on the back and everything. Big 5'4". How you doing?
And look at him, big country over here. This is Wes Uhler, man. It's been a minute since we had him on the show. I tried to get him on the show last week.
You did,
and people were like, "Why hasn't Wes been on?" I'm like, "Someone's too much of a dad these days to have free time." But we just love having Wes on the show, and I had to get him on to talk about Zack Frazier, the new Steelers center. First of all, Wes, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, CC. Much better than last week when I've got two daughters under the age of 3, so life is a little crazy in the Uhler household.
Hands are full.
And Chris and I were talking about doing a show. I think it was Wednesday last week. And early in the morning, I got the message from daycare that my youngest had pink eye and I had to come pick her up. And then obviously I had to take her to a pediatrician and get her all of her medicine and get her nursed back to health and all that good stuff. So what I thought was going to be a very easy Wednesday leading up to the chaotic 3 days of the NFL draft ended up being quite the opposite. It was not relaxing. I was not able to catch up with CC. But you know what? The universe had a plan because you wanted to talk to me about Zack Frazier and how he would fit with the Steelers. Now we can talk about Zack Frazier and how he's going to fit with the Steelers since it all happened. So, it's been too long. I'm excited to be back, man.
All right. Before we get into Zack Frazier, the man, I want you to give us. You just take us back to the moment you saw Zack Frazier was going to be a Steeler. Whether that was you saw it on Twitter, you saw it on TV, you saw it in the room. What was your response? Because I know this is a dream come true for you.
So not to toot your horn, all right? I don't want to inflate your ego, but I actually saw your tweet first. So I was on air. I was on air on Steelers Nation Radio at the facility down there with Matt Williamson and Dale Lawley, and the Steelers pick is coming up, right? So we're kind of, you know how that is. You're like furiously you're just looking for any little tidbits, anything, especially when you're doing radio in that kind of format where it's very kind of sit around and wait for something to happen. And so refreshing. And we're talking about, could they go wide receiver and take Mitchell? Could they go center and take Zack Frazier? Is he still going to, because, it's pick 48 on the television or whatever at this time. Is Frazier still going to be there? Could they go wide receiver? What are they going to do here? And I see you were the first person to tweet it. Steelers select West Virginia center Zack Frazier, whatever you said. And I'm not going to lie to you, CC, there was a little cynical part of me that is like, all right, is Chris messing with people here? Part of me was going, holy bleep. And the other part of me was like, is Chris just yanking everybody's chain?
Is there just a 13-9 joke around the corner?
Yeah, exactly. Is he going to quote tweet this 13.9 seconds later and say, just kidding, gotcha? You know what I mean? Like,
I wish I would have thought of something like that. That'd have been amazing.
But then I hit refresh, 20, 30 seconds later, and somebody else tweets it. And then somebody else tweets it. And I'm like, holy crap, this is really happening. And I think we were in a break at that point because we were trying to time it to come back so we would have, 15, 20 minutes in the next segment to talk about the Steelers' 51st selection in the draft. I'm like, Matt, Dale, I think it's Zack Frazier. And Dale's like, I think it's Zack Frazier. And so, I couldn't believe it. Like, I really couldn't, Chris. It was honestly, and I know a lot of people, will not like me wearing this WVU jersey. We got a lot of Pitt people on the podcast, certainly.
Yeah.
But it was very similar to the Kenny Pickett thing 2 years ago. Like 2 years ago, we were down there for the draft, and the Steelers needed a quarterback, and Kenny Pickett was a quarterback, and we were all like, this could really happen. But then when it does, you're like, holy bleep, I can't believe this actually happened, because we all know how big of a crapshoot the draft is.
Yes.
It was kind of that same thing. Yeah, I knew that the Steelers needed a center. Yeah, I know that Zack Frazier is a center, as someone who's wearing his jersey right now, obviously. And so you knew it was a possibility, but it's the NFL draft. There's 32 teams, so it's not a 1 in 32 possibility because some are weighted higher.
There's
the Steelers actually need it. The Chiefs aren't drafting a center. They have Creed Humphrey. The Ravens aren't drafting a center. They have Tyler Linderbaum, and those guys are in their mid-20s. The Saints aren't drafting a center. They have Eric McCoy, who's 26. But you knew the Steelers were a possibility, maybe one of the biggest possibilities in terms of one of those teams that really did need a center. And so, yeah, I was shocked, honestly. And then all of a sudden it was very funny because now I don't want to make it seem like I'm the one with a big ego. It's going to sound like I am. I'm not. But for like 5 minutes there, I was kind of like the center of attention on the south side of the Steelers facility because every media member, every scout, every assistant coach that I know, I mean, I've been with the Steelers now for 6 years. This will be my 7th year. I've been traveling with the team for the last 2 years. I stay at training camp in the dorms for the last 6 years, well, minus COVID. Like I've gotten to know a lot of these people, whether it's media, whether it's scouts, coaches, whatever. And like everyone's kind of like, Wes, like coming over and like hitting me in the ribs and like looking at me and pointing as they walk by and everything like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I was shocked. Honestly, I still kind of am, Chris. You know, like I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I've got a great relationship with Zack or anything, but we've had him on our podcast before. I know his father, Ray. You know, it's wild to me that like he's going to be there at minicamp when we're there in a few weeks and OTAs, and he's going to be there at the dorms in Latrobe when we're out there for July and August, and I'm going to see his parents out at practice a few days, I'm sure. Yeah, it's very surreal for sure.
Absolutely. And listen, like, yeah, I won't toot my own too loudly, but I did beat Jordan Schultz, Adam Schefter, and the rest of the world on Zack Frazier.
You were the first one I saw it from. I'm not lying to you.
That wasn't a prediction. That was Chris knows something. But anyways, I want to talk more about Zack Frazier, the player himself, real quick. And we're going to do this over the next 2 segments. So I may stop you here to do a commercial break after your first response. But you mentioned Creed Humphrey, Tyler Linderbaum. I'll throw Frank Ragnow in that conversation. Best centers in the NFL. Is that the kind of center the Steelers are getting in Zack Frazier? Like a guy, like maybe not right away, but like in maybe a year or two's time, we're talking about him as one of the best centers in the NFL. And I know people are going to be like, he's wearing his jersey, Chris. What are you asking him for? But explain to people why you think Zack Frazier could be that guy if you think he is.
Sure, yeah. And I will tell you right now, he's not going to be Marquise Pouncey. Like he's not going to step into the NFL and be arguably the best center as a rookie.
Which Pouncey was. Like he was amazing.
Pouncey was. But I like the Creed Humphrey comparison, and it's funny you say that. I'm sure because I know you were there at his podium at the Combine, and I know you just listen or involved in media availability. Like Zack knows Creed Humphrey very well. Creed was in his last year at Oklahoma when Zack was a freshman at WVU, and they kind of struck up a friendship. Zack will tell you that's the guy I model my game after. You know, even though he's only 3 years older than me, like I look up to that guy. I always have. I think that there is a real chance that Zack could have that same type of path where he comes in and has a solid rookie season. Again, no one's saying he's not an all-pro. No one's saying he's the best center in football. But by the time he's in year 3 or 4, you're putting him in that list of 4, 5, 6, you know, of the names that are considered. I think particularly now that Kelsey's gone, right? Because he kind of held that throne for a while, but now it's somebody's to snatch. I think he has a very high floor, Zack Frazier does, but I think the ceiling is higher than people give him credit for as well, too. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's going to be Pouncey or Webster or Dermontti Dawson because that's just unfair to a 22-year-old who is yet to even practice for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think he can be on that short list of, we can look up and he'll be 25, 26 years old, and you'll be talking about him as one of the handful of best centers in the National Football League. I certainly think that's a possibility.
The way that I graded him as a player. I ranked him as my 29th best player in the draft class this year. And again, beyond the reason of just the 1 out of 32 teams, I didn't think Zack Frazier would make it through the second round 251. I thought for sure the Steelers were going to have to trade up for him. In all the scenarios that I went through, I was just looking at all the teams that could use a center, and I was like, man, like. But again, I also thought
and there were a few of those in like the late 40s too.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And like that was where I was a little concerned if the Steelers were going to get him. But I also looked at it when I said this at the end of day one. The fact that Jackson Powers Johnson was still on the board is a very good sign for the Steelers. No doubt. It turned out to certainly be the case. Zack Frazier getting him, they get him at 51st overall. I want to talk more about how Zack Frazier is going to contribute, especially in the run game, because we're talking about the run game. The Steelers are going to be road graders and all this stuff. How does Zack Frazier measure in there? We'll talk about that in the next segment here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter and Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that we're also brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told that I'm a competitive person, and well, all that stems back to my game nights with my family growing up, and we used to have a lot of different favorite games, but the Super Bowl for the family was always Monopoly. Whenever I won Monopoly, it was like I had a championship belt around my shoulder all week long. I would talk so much trash about it. My old man would have to know exactly. Wes knows about the championship belts, but now I can play Monopoly and beat my friends and carry a championship belt every single day on Monopoly Go, an app that you need to download right to your phone today. It's a fun game that's now available in the Google Store, the App Store, or on Google Play. It can be the classic game Monopoly with a new twist. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. You can play with hundreds of different people on 100 different Monopoly boards in crazy locations. Build up your own city, bring in big money. You can charge your friends for iconic rent at iconic properties like Park Place and Boardwalk, or you can put a heist on their vaults so that you can rise up the Monopoly leaderboards even faster. Get in the game and join your friends at Monopoly Go. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or on Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with the Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio and proud WVU man himself with the Zack Frazier jersey on. Okay, let's talk more about Zack's contributions in the run game. You've watched him for years. And I mean, I've studied his tape too, but I want to give you a chance to talk about the perspective. What you see that his best things about his game that are going to make him a powerful contributor in the middle of the Steelers line when they're trying to run the football.
No doubt. Yeah. So let me say this first. I don't want to make it seem like pass protection is something he doesn't excel at or struggles with, he gave up 0 sacks and over, I think, 330 pass reps this season. So that's not a weakness of his game by any means. But Zack Frazier accelerates running the football, or in a run game situation, I should say, because he's not running the football, but you get what I'm saying.
Right.
And that's where the wrestler in him really shines. I think you would expect that. Like, the first words that come to mind when you watch his tape or when you think of Zack Frazier are, finish, brawler, nasty, leverage, torque, all those things that translate to being really darn good in the run game. He's got those vice grip hands and he can move people. Like, he's like a tree trunk in a lot of ways, with just insane upper body strength. And again, with that wrestler background, his center of gravity, he gets to the second level and he almost still looks like he's in his stance. Like, that's how low to the ground he can play, use that leverage, use that torque, that wrestler background. The run game is where he really excels. And I know you do a lot with RAS, with relative athletic scores. And I think a lot of our age, the online Steeler fans, right, do a lot with RAS. And I know some people were looking at the Steelers draft class and his score isn't quite as high as everybody else's. Zack Frazier is not a gold medal athlete, but I think that he's a better athlete than you've seen, because while everybody else was preparing to do the 3 cone and the 40, he was recovering from a broken leg. Right. As soon as these guys' seasons end in November or December, if you play a bowl game, if you go to the playoff, whatever, you start practicing the 40 and the 3 cone and the shuttle and all these different things. He wasn't doing that. He was trying to rehab a broken leg. So athleticism, again, same thing. It's not the strong point of his game. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's a great athlete, but he's got the ability to get to that second level without a doubt. And I think he's really going to be perfect for Najee, for Jalen, for Arthur Smith's offense, for what the Steelers are building there on the offensive line. And Chris, I think the best way to show tangible impact for Zack Frazier, transformative impact, you could say. I've given this stat a million times in the last 4 days or whatever. The year before, Zack Frazier got the WVU in 2020. So that COVID-shortened season was his freshman year.
Right.
The year before that, 2019, Neil Brown's first season as WVU head coach, WVU averaged 73 rush yards per game. Was the second worst in Power 5 football.
Yeah.
And that was with Letty Brown, who was a pretty good running back, who was at the combine and all these things, plays in the UFL now, like a pretty solid running back, good college running back. And it was like, if they could can WVU just get to 100 yards rushing? If they could get to 100 yards rushing, they got a chance to win this game. But man, can they averaged 73 yards per game on the ground the year before Zack Frazier got there. By the time he left last year, they averaged over 230 yards rushing per game and had the number one rushing offense in Power 5 football. And that was all with going over 200 snaps without giving up a sack, too. And all while in 12 games, WVU used 7 different starting offensive line, six or seven different starting offensive line combinations due to injury. So it's not like they had the luxury of having the same 5 guys either. A lot of guys deserve credit in that, obviously, but he was the catalyst. He was the transformative one who came in and started as a freshman. And, Neil Brown was on with our buddy Adam Crowley this week, and he said, Zack Frazier came into our locker room and showed seniors how to work. I mean, he came in and showed our seniors what their work ethic should really be. And that's why he was the first guy since 1980, true freshman, to start on the offensive line at WVU. He had a transformative impact on that offense, on that run game. And I don't know what's going on with my Zoom screen here. Fireworks. It's celebrating really the fire. It's celebrating the fireworks going off here while I'm talking about Zack Frazier. To have that kind of impact on an offense as a center, right? Like not as a quarterback, not as a running back, to be able to transform a run game and an offensive line and an offense like that. And they did that with a first-year starting quarterback this past year too. I think just speaks to what he was able to do in that locker room. One of the worst Power 5 rushing attacks into one that went for over 230 yards per game, the highest number in Power 5 football this past year.
Absolutely. Just a quick note here. I believe that's because you're using like something like FaceTime, maybe are you using a Mac? Because I think that's what it is. I just turned it off. It's something that Mike DeFabo actually had happened one time on the show. It's actually really funny. So if someone goes back,
it was kind of perfect timing. I'm talking up Zack Frazier and fireworks go off in the background.
If you say it was the word celebration, and then that's what that because you also did like this, and it picked up the thumb, so it gave a thumbs up, which is pretty funny. But anyways, let's get back to Zack Frazier here. You brought up his relative athletic score, and it was the lowest of the Steelers class. Granted, the Steelers also had a very athletic class, and they've been doing this for a while.
They did,
but it was still a 7.27. You know what Marquise Pouncey's relative athletic score was if you went back to 2010?
Similar?
4.48, significantly higher than Marquise Pouncey. Yeah, that's what I said too when I looked this up. The only thing that Marquise Pouncey really had on his side was he was 6'4", but Zack Frazier more reps on the bench press. Zack Frazier better 40-yard dash time, better 20-yard split, better 10-yard split, better vertical jump, much better broad jump, better shuttle time, and the one thing that Pouncey has on Frazier athletically in comparative times is it's the 3-cone drill where you edged him out there. And I'll also note this: like this doesn't mean that Zack Frazier's due to just be Marquise Pouncey because we just say he's not. Because also that was 14 years ago, where the way that players trained and prepared were different. But still, that is to show that Zack Frazier, he's not lacking athleticism. It's just that he's not testing out the box like Graham Barton tested out the box. That's why he was the first center off the
Graham
board.
Barton's magna cum laude of athleticism. Exactly. You know what I mean? Like Zack Frazier's just on the honor roll.
No, I'd say he's summa cum laude. Like I'd say he's right up there because but that's what I'm saying is that Zack Frazier and the elements of his game that make him really good aren't that he's gonna pull and move at like 20 miles an hour and just truck somebody. It's the fact that when he snaps the ball, if it's you and me, like right here, and he's got a defensive tackle right in his face, there aren't many guys in college football who pushed him backwards at the snap of the ball. He could snap the ball with one hand, and the other hand, I'm protecting and I'm getting my leverage, and I'm not just not giving up ground. I'm creating ground. And that's something the Steelers haven't had. And Marquise Pouncey did that at times, but when the Steelers used to go up against big defensive tackles like Brandon Williams or like guys that used to play for the Ravens, there were times that Marquise Pouncey would struggle with big dudes in the hole, and that would be like the one weakness that you could say was part of his game.
Sure.
That is a strength of Zack Frazier. When I watch his tape, he's a guy, you in my face, you won't be here long, buddy, because I'm moving you. And again, that's why I really liked the Zack Frazier pick. I said all along, I was saying it during even before I was the first out there to have that the Steelers actually picked him. I was saying to trade up for him because I just wasn't sure he'd fall that far. And I thought, like, man, if you could get him with Faltanu, with Broderick Jones and Daniels and Sayamalu, that offensive line could be working next year. And to me, that is a huge part of what the Steelers need. It's not just, again, they're not going to just ground and pound 3 yards in a cloud of dust all the time, but this team wants to run the football, and you are better at running the football when you have the dogs on the offensive line. And I think Zack Frazier and Faltanu and Jones are all dogs that they have now added to this roster in just 2 draft years.
I completely agree with you. And like, I think there's some 49ers vibes there. Like, I really do. Like, and I think that's smart because, you know, there's what, Chris, like 5 unicorn quarterbacks in the NFL, right? Who, if you've got one of these 5 guys, you got a shot at the Super Bowl every year, right? But there's like 5 of those guys, maybe, in the National Football League. The only thing worse than not having one of those guys, like the Steelers did the Steelers had one for 18 years in Ben Roethlisberger. The only thing worse than not having one is pretending that you have one when you don't. Right. And a lot of teams do that. And they can win some games, but then they ultimately fizzle out pretty quickly. If you want to be a team like the Niners, who's had a lot of success without that guy, I mean, I know people will say they still haven't won to a Super Bowl. Okay, they've been to 3 in the last 11 years. Like, if the Steelers go to 3 Super Bowls in the next 11 years, I think we'd all take that.
Everyone's going to be really happy.
Forget the result. You know what I mean? So you don't have one of those unicorns at quarterback. So you look around and you go, okay, well, what can we do better than everybody else then? We're going to go punch you in the mouth. Exactly. You know what I mean?
And that's Steelers football.
That's Steelers football. That's football that this fan base loves. And, you know, if you're going to try and drag everybody out into the alley and turn it into a fist fight, wouldn't you like to have a 4-time state champion wrestler kind of at the center of that offensive line there?
I have him on my back. Yeah, that's absolutely right there. I think to end their point here on the run game, I think what's really a good chance for the Steelers to have this is that even if Zack Frazier, I'm not looking for Zack Frazier to pull and block in space the way Pouncey did and the way he got downfield. He can do that, but I wouldn't necessarily look for my number one job for Zack Frazier is nobody is getting in the way in A gap. If someone's there, you move them out the way. If nobody's there, you make sure that no one twists into this hole and you get to the second level and absolutely maul somebody. The Steelers, Broderick Jones can pull. We've seen it. He's athletic enough. Troy Faltanu could definitely pull. He's more than athletic enough. Daniel Sayamalu, they've both shown that. You now have 4 guys there that can do that very well. And if Zack Frazier's a 5th, that's awesome. But I think his biggest strength is the fact that when you look at how he plays, I think coming into the NFL, when they go up against teams, those big defensive tackles, the ones that get in your face, like let's say if the Steelers are up against Chris Jones, I'm not saying he's going to shut down Chris Jones, but he will be able to say, like, I have the leverage, the strength, the ability to counter guys in the A gap, which Mason Cole was, he did a serviceable job for the past 2 years for the Steelers, but that was never something that he was able to provide. And if Zack Frazier does that, it changes a lot for the run game. We got to get to a break. We come back. I wanted to ask Wes about the receiver position because the Steelers did add a receiver in Roman Wilson, but many are people asking what's next. That more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel, the #1 sportsbook in America. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL, and baseball is in full swing. That makes FanDuel your #1 destination to go to bet on every single game in all the leagues. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed with their first bet, win or lose. That's right, $150 to use on point spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and you'll make sure that your first bet is an automatic win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Uhler from Steeler Nation Radio. Also does In the Gun, another great WVU podcast.
Yeah, and we had Zack on a few weeks ago, 70 minutes with him. Now, this was obviously before he knew he was going to be a Steeler. But if you're looking for more Zack Frazier content, there's plenty on the In the Gun podcast.
Absolutely, go check that out. It's a great WVU podcast. But let's get into the wide receiver position real quick here. The Steelers did add Roman Wilson, who I really liked. Roman Wilson, I thought he was great at Senior Bowl.
I thought he was a possibility at 51. Honestly,
I thought so too. Honestly,
like not when it played out with the wide receivers that were still on the board, but leading up to the draft, I thought he was
I thought wide receivers were I thought Adonai Mitchell was going to go much earlier than he did, which is I was surprised to still see him there at 51. Then of course he went off the board at 52 to the Colts. I think it was, but
it was point right after Zack Frazier. Yeah.
But point being, Roman Wilson was a guy I had graded as a second round guy, and they got him in the third round. I think that's amazing value for him. I think that he can be a boost there. But there's some people who look at it and say, "Oh, he's only like 5'10", and like he's a good route runner, but he still needs to learn how to like work against guys that are physical, and they're not sure if he's an outside guy. So is he really a wide receiver 2, or is he more of a wide receiver 3 right now? And if he doesn't have a wide receiver 2, does that mean the Steelers need to go get a guy out there?" And so people are wondering about that. How big a need, Wes, do you think this wide receiver position is right now for the Steelers to figure out whether it's a trade, signing someone in free agency, or making something happen? Or are we overthinking this and the Steelers might just have, if they're going to be a more balanced offense, maybe they don't need as many receivers? How do you see the situation?
I would say the Steelers' need at wide receiver is still significant.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair to say. Could they line up and play a game on Sunday? Absolutely, without a doubt. But I think in the context of, everyone knows the number. The defense is the highest paid in the league. The offense is at the bottom of the list, right? In that context of, needing more from your offense, not needing them to score 28 points every single game, 30 points every single game, but certainly needing more from your offense. Knowing Russell Wilson is a guy with borderline Hall of Fame credentials that is also, though, 36 years old, I would still like to add another weapon. I believe Pat Freiermuth can be a significant part of this offense. We know how much they're going to run the football, as we just discussed with that offensive line with Najee and Jalen Warren. You got George Pickens, and you've brought in, some Quez Watkins and some Van Jefferson, some players that certainly belong on NFL fields on Sundays that are, professional wide receivers. But I still think if you really want this offense to have that game-breaking potential, I think you need to add another proven playmaker at the wide receiver position, because, Chris, while we like a lot of those guys right now, there's nobody in there that has a massive body of work. There's nobody in there that's gotten that Deontay Johnson type second contract. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think we all believe and we know in the talent that George Pickens has. But do you really want to assume that he's going to be the nailed-on number one, have a great year, stay healthy, stay locked in and engaged, while you're assuming that one of these other guys is going to be a viable number 2? That's just a lot to assume, and you know what they say happens when you assume.
Exactly.
I think right now you can project the Steelers' wide receiver room not necessarily being a problem, but I think that that's kind of like even if George Pickens has a really good year and Roman Wilson has a good year, like, it still feels like you need another weapon in that arsenal, right? You still need to add another tool onto that tool belt for Russell Wilson if you want this offense to really be able to take off. Because other than the run game, I think so much of that pass game is a question mark. We think Freiermuth can have a big year and start to have a bigger impact, but we got to see it. We think George Pickens can prove himself as a wide receiver 1 and maybe one of the best 10 in the National Football League or something like that, but we got to see it. Like a lot of these things you're going with faith on. And so I would like to add a little more known to so much unknown there in the wide receiver room. And maybe that's the final kind of Thanos, final Infinity Stone for Omar Khan's gauntlet of no longer running your daddy's or your granddaddy's Steelers, is like, bang, I'm going to go trade a future draft pick for Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk or one of these guys. You know what I mean? Sutton, somebody like that. Cortland Sutton, Cameron Sutton. The wide receiver Sutton, not the defensive back formerly of the Steelers Sutton. that would make me feel much better about this offense. Because again, can they go play a game on Sunday and win? Absolutely. But if I really want to project that this defense can be great and the offense can be good enough for this team to go on a run come January, I would feel a lot better about that if they added another weapon to that offense, particularly at the wide receiver position.
Currently, free agent wide receivers include guys like Tyler Boyd, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., Hunter Renfrow, Mecole Hardman. There's guys out there, but
nice players. Yeah.
Nice players that you could probably get for cheap, although reportedly Tyler Boyd doesn't want to go for cheap. He's waiting for a deal right now, and the Steelers are maybe a little reluctant to try to sign a guy for big numbers.
Playing a little chicken there, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's a little back and forth between how those things are working, but a trade isn't out the realm of possibility. Talking about a Cortland Sutton type of player who the Broncos, maybe they want to move on there. If you can get a guy, again, I'm not giving up a first round pick or a second round pick for any of these guys. Maybe a third round pick, but if the Steelers could get like a day 3 pick up and get one of these guys, you look at what the Texans paid for Stephon Diggs. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to make it happen, but it takes patience to get there. But if there's anything we just saw with this draft class, is that Omar Khan is very patient when he's trying to get the right price there. And that's why I think the Steelers aren't done at wide receiver and that we will see a move there. It might not come right away, might not come, immediately. It might take some time, might even happen during training camp. Who knows? But I do think there will be an addition, and we will not just see the receiver room basically be George Pickens, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, and then everybody else in that room. He's Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio, also of the In the Gun podcast. Wes, thanks so much for joining us. Let me find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Yes, sir. Yeah, of course. Arthur Moats and I do the Steelers Blitz. It's at noon on Steelers Nation Radio and Fox Sports Pittsburgh. If you're in the Pittsburgh area, you could get us on 970 AM terrestrially. That's one of those words I always mess up on your actual radio dial. Okay. And then, yes, of course, if you're a tortured mountaineer soul like me, or you just want to learn more about Zack Frazier, In the Gun podcast is the WView show that I do as well.
Absolutely. He's Wes Uhler. Check him out at Wes Uhler on Twitter. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those episodes and so much more. Back tomorrow with another episode on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.